Hello, Mark Gatiss here. I, like you, have been a fan of TV's Doctor Who all my life and obsessed with missing episodes, as I'm sure you are. I would like to encourage you to donate to registered charity Film is Fabulous to give them the best possible chance of saving as many film collections as possible, amongst which, just maybe, there might be some missing episodes of Doctor Who, the children's own program which adults adore. Enjoy the podcast.
Well, hello, and a very warm welcome to another special edition of the Doctor Who Missing Episodes podcast. My name is Tim, and ordinarily this channel produces long-form, deep dive, deep cuts into the missing episodes of Doctor Who. So if you're listening on YouTube or tuning in via a podcast platform for the first time, please give us a subscribe, and I'd love for you to join us on our journey through the missing episodes of Doctor Who. So in this episode, we are joined by three of the Film is Fabulous team, and you're going to hear about who they are, what they do, the challenges they face, the fact that they've been awarded the status of a charitable trust and why that's really important. And we will talk about comments made about missing Doctor Who episodes. And by the time the discussion is finished, I hope you will feel compelled, only if you are able, to lend them your support, either with a one-off charitable donation or perhaps, if you can, set up a regular payment. Wherever you are listening to this, I will leave a link and an email address so that you can directly support their initiative. And this episode neatly bookends a previous episode we recorded a couple of years ago, where I met with film collectors who would become the Film is Fabulous team. That's a really interesting deep dive into the world of film collecting, and we also talk about television on film in collections. So if you haven't heard that one, that's really worth checking out as well, and it'll provide a lot of context for what you're about to hear. And finally, before we get on with it and hear what the Film is Fabulous team have to say, please do stick around right to the end. There's a lot of information here. It's really fascinating, and there'll be a lot to think about. So let's get on with it. So why don't you introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Sue Malden. I'm a trustee of Film is Fabulous and have been since 2023, I think. It's great to be part of this project because my background has meant I've always been interested in television history, and time at the BBC, I realised how much was not in the archives you'd expect them to be. So I'm so pleased to be involved with this.
Hello, I'm Justin Smith. I'm Professor of Cinema and Television History at Montfort University in Leicester. And I'm a film historian and really excited to be a part of the partnership with Film is Fabulous, which I'll go on to talk more about later in our conversation.
My name is John Franklin. I'm a film collector. I've been involved in film collecting for almost 40 years, an active player in the UK's film collecting community. And we don't actually get a badge showing membership. We just turn up and talk and chat and sell and buy and do all the things that collectors do. I'm a trustee of Film is Fabulous as well, and I'm very grateful to Tim to give us this opportunity to come along and to tell the world, or at least Doctor Who fandom, about some of the things we do.
Oh, well, thank you so much all for coming along. And as you can imagine, I'm looking forward to this enormously. So we talked before, but for those who are not aware, why don't you tell us what Film is Fabulous is and how it came about?
So I think it would be relatively straightforward to say that Film is Fabulous is now a charitable trust and a registered charity that's run by film collectors, cinema lovers, and vintage television enthusiasts. That's basically what we are. probably the more interesting story is how Film is Fabulous came about, what we've actually done over the last 2 years, and, well, yes, give you some insight into why we've done the things that we have. So, as I mentioned, I'm a film collector and have a lot of friends within the UK's film collecting community. Sadly, the backdrop to the film collecting community is that it's predominantly composed of elderly men, many of whom in their 80s and older than that, who live alone, have enthusiasms for films and all of the nostalgia that goes with periods in their life, which they reflect by their collection or through their collection. And ultimately, during COVID, a lot of those elderly men were sick and passed away. Now, there was a point when we were in lockdown where in very quick succession, I had a couple of telephone calls from people, which went something along the lines of, "Hi, John, it's such and such. Dad's died. What should we do with his films?" And of course, that was an issue that confronted many people. The priority was, of course, at that time to wind up the estate, find a way of selling the property and disposing of the films and all of the equipment and memorabilia in as convenient and expedited way as possible. And sadly, because of all the restrictions that were in place, and because of all the things that were confronting people, a lot of film and a lot of equipment just ended up in a skip outside the property and subsequently in landfill. And I felt that this was wrong. And so I reached out to a lot of my friends within the film collecting community and to those organizations that I felt were in a position to help. And for whatever reason, and I'm not being judgmental in any way here, we weren't able to get the support that we needed to basically provide practical assistance to save those films and those collections. So I thought we should do something. And then I went out to the wider community and to people like Justin and Sue to get their help and their support. And really, through that consultation, what we decided to do was to try and find a way of encouraging elderly film collectors to make a list of their films and to add the list, era codicil, to their will. Because one of the things that became absolutely clear to us during that traumatic COVID period is many of the collectors who passed away or were seriously unwell had made absolutely no provision for the future of their films, and a considerable number who passed away didn't even have a will. So, of course, there were no clear instructions for the executors, the families, their friends to lean on to understand what to do. So with Justin's support and with people like Sue's support and others, we staged our initial event at the Phoenix Cinema and Arts Centre in Leicester at the end of October 2023. We had various panels where we invited guests from different backgrounds to talk about their areas of expertise. And we did everything to try and encourage the collectors who were present to basically create a list of their films, to add that list, as I said, through a codicil to their will, so that the future of the films was safeguarded and they weren't vulnerable if they became sick or passed away. And everyone thought that was a fantastic idea. But the reality is, when we followed things up in the aftermath of the event, no one had actually done it. So we were faced with a dilemma. What do we do? And we decided to launch a pilot scheme, which was initially scheduled to run 6 months, but fortunately was extended a little longer, so that we could identify key parts of the process. Could we actually help film collectors? Could we actually take in collections? Could we actually catalog? And these were all questions that we had no answer to at that stage. And quite frankly, had no real clear idea as to what we would find. So we launched the pilot scheme. And the pilot scheme allowed us to take in bite-sized pieces from people's collections, normally around about 500 films. And I say bite-sized pieces because some of the collections that we encountered had more than 10,000 films. 10,000 films. We were able to process through the pilot scheme, it's quite a support team, approximately 1,000 films in a month. So you can imagine if we took in a couple of very large collections, we'd be talking of 2 years' work. So all of these things played into our being able to ascertain what the situation was, what we were capable of doing, and of course, what we were not capable of doing, and how we might come up with an overall strategy and plan for the future. Now, I don't wish to embarrass him because he sat next to me. But I have to say, without the support of Montfort University and without Justin's personal commitment to this project, we would have been unable to achieve a fraction. We wouldn't have been able to do what we've done. So we owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to Montfort University and to Justin himself, who's driven vans, lugged boxes, done many things that I'm sure he didn't expect to do. And that extends to the people in special collections, Catherine Short, David Milnes. I could go on and on. We have been very fortunate to have the support of De Montfort University, and long may that continue.
Thank you, John. I do have a couple of questions about collectors, which I'll come to, but go into some more specifics about the role that De Montfort University has played then, Justin.
Yes, well, it's very kind of John to pay tribute to what we've been able to do to assist Film is Fabulous over the past 2 years. In terms of background, our cinema and television history researchers here at DMU have a long-standing commitment to cinema and television history research. We've got long track records in research and publications in the field. We've supported many PhD students who've gone on to pursue academic careers and work in the film and television industry. And we're specialists in archival and oral histories of cinema and cinema culture, with some very specific expertise in British cinema and television history. And so when John approached us, we welcomed his initiative with much interest. The archives that we have expand at DMU, both in cinema and television history and within our dedicated special collections department in the library, are many and varied, but they are mainly paper archives. So up until our relationship with Film is Fabulous began, we weren't primarily keepers of actual film. However, we did have that long-standing relationship to and understanding of archival methods and of archives in film and television. So, just for example, we're the keepers of the Hammer Films script archive. We have the papers of Palace Pictures and Scala Enterprises. We keep the papers of Andrew Davis, the celebrated television adapter, and the television producer, Sue Birtwistle. We also have in our special collections the Tony Hancock Appreciation Society archive, the Tony and Michael Klinger Independent Producers archive as well. That's just a few of the examples of the collections that we have and that we maintain, both for active researchers to consult, but also in the case of companies like Palace Films, doing historical archive work on behalf of the company when they need to consult something historically. True also of Hammer. So that's the background to our interest in archives. But then when Film is Fabulous approached us and we were developing the idea for the pilot study, which John has outlined, it was evident that we needed space in which to work. And thankfully, Special Collections at DNU were able to provide the facilities, proper storage facilities, air-conditioned, temperature-controlled, dry, dark, perfect for storing film, and more importantly, facilities where we could examine the films that came in and catalogue them. And DNU were also able, through small pots of internal funding, to support those initial pilot studies that Film is Fabulous carried out, to enable us to develop the methodology for receiving, organising, storing, examining and cataloguing films on site, and the logistics to enable us to take in films and to move them on through the process. And we established through that, by employing for a short period a postdoctoral researcher who we employed as a cataloguer, to actually hone that methodology and to develop the means of operation that would help us define really what Film is Fabulous core purpose would be. So for De Montfort University, it's been an extraordinary honour and privilege to be involved in this enterprise, and it's one that we're very much committed to the future of as well. I'll just say one more thing on this point. The relationship with the Phoenix Cinema in Leicester. I can't speak highly enough of the partnership with the Phoenix. And that in itself, again, is long-standing. It's a long-standing partnership between De Montfort University and the Phoenix Cinema and Digital Arts Centre, our local art house cinema, who have been absolutely tremendous in supporting us and enabling a Midlands-based platform right here in the centre of the country in Leicester in order to showcase some of the finds that Film is Fabulous has unearthed, which, of course, is part of our core purpose, not only to rescue vulnerable films, to discover along the way some real gems that are missing from archives, but also, as much as is possible, to share those finds and discoveries with the public with an educational and culturally enhancing kind of purpose. So De Montfort University is very proud of that and very pleased to be involved in this partnership.
Thanks, Justin. I think as you mentioned the last event that was held in Leicester, I think it's worth reminding my audience especially that there have been events to showcase television finds, but in terms of the texture of film collections, when we're talking about hobbyist film collectors, television isn't really in the picture, as it were. We're talking about collectors who have a love of cinema and collect cinematic film, and television is often a byproduct. Isn't that right, John?
Yes, absolutely. And I think we'll go into more detail to do with collectors and their enthusiasms, their nostalgia for certain things. But you have to remember, rather like stamp collectors and medal collectors, there's a very broad spectrum as to what can be a collector, what your enthusiasms could be. I mean, I know collectors that are only interested in collecting things on traction engines and Shire horses. And because that was something that they had an enthusiasm for when they were young. They were with their father, their girlfriend, their wife-to-be. And of course, they had shared experiences. I mean, I can relate to that. I've still got, crazy as it sounds, I am a collector. I've still got the ticket to when I went and saw a particular film with a girl who I was going out with at the time, stuck to the front of the Laserdisc that I own as a memory. So these are things that, of course, stay with you throughout your life and have a very, very strong sentimental bond.
So you're also working with official archives, both in cinema terms and in television terms. Sue, perhaps you could talk about how Film is Fabulous work with the official archives.
Yeah, certainly. But one thing just to add, I'm sure you've got a very informed audience here, but not everybody realizes that a lot of early television or anything that survives is actually on film. In a way, there are several definitions of the word film. One might mean movies, i.e. fictional stories and so on, but a lot of early television was either pumped out live or, if you were lucky, was tele-recorded as it went out, or tele-recorded for future repeats and so on. And that medium is film. So television very much comes into film collectors' brief, I'm sure, and adds to their interest and dimension. Looking after film in an archive is really difficult, as John hinted earlier, how de Montfort were helping with specialized storage. You can't just keep it in the upstairs bedroom, which sadly probably some collectors had, but not only because they didn't know that it needs to be kept cool. Well, I think it's going a little too far to freeze it, but some people think you should be doing that. So it's a costly business doing archiving properly, as well as the need to preserve the physical format in the right conditions. As we tried to appeal to people in the first session in Leicester, it's so important to catalogue and log what you've got there, because not everybody's memory lasts forever. Other people come along and don't know what on earth that scrappy label on the front of the can means. So in terms of archive work, there's a lot to do, and we appreciate that's been difficult necessarily for people to do it over the years, but eventually it will need to be done, and it needs to be done by the big established film and television archives. So for them, it's quite a costly business. So some of them welcome our finds with open arms. Others maybe think, oh, hang on, do we really need that? If we got rid of it 20 years ago, do we need it now? So we have to have very sensitive discussions with the big archives. And that in turn can lead to extra work and hassle for Film is Fabulous people. We often have to transfer the original that the collector comes forward with to a digital format that makes it much more viewable and accessible, or that maybe that the original rights-holding archive demands that they have a digital copy and expect us maybe to pay for it instead of possibly them, as I said, welcoming our donation with open arms. So that leads to time spent for Film is Fabulous discussing and negotiating with these large archives as to whether they will take the stuff in, will they contribute to preservation of it and accessibility of it. So we do have to spend time and money discussing that kind of thing. Then sometimes there's a lot of technical work that needs to be done. Film is vulnerable stuff, really. It can get scratched, it can get warped, it can just get dirty. So it often needs to be cleaned up, and this all costs us time and money. And again, the big archives are spending that kind of money all the time, but they've never got enough money to spend on everything that they're holding. So there's always a trade-off that has to go on, and the content has to be rescued in the first place and held safely until later maybe the funding can be achieved to do all the digitization work and the scanning, the 4K scanning, which needs to be done at the moment to try and get the best possible image of the original. That comes to another point really about the items that may be found. Sometimes it's something that we know is missing totally from an archive or a collection. But in some cases, it may be that the rights-holding archive only has, I don't know, maybe a VHS copy of something or a rather very scratched print when we maybe have come across a negative, a clean negative for them. So sometimes we're finding better quality images than are actually in the master archive. And so I hope that sort of sums up about how much effort has to go in from Film is Fabulous side. These archives don't just say, oh, brilliant, bring it on. There's expenditure on our part, there's discussions and debates, and sometimes they say, no, we're not going to, we don't need it, we're not taking it in, we can't see a commercial value in it. And then that gives a dilemma to us at Film is Fabulous, is what do we do about this? We can't possibly let it go in the bin, But there are lots of other questions about what can we do with it, particularly as always ownership of television or films, feature films, is the physical ownership of the item. And secondly, the copyright, the rights of the rights holder. And for rights holders, that's sometimes more complicated. It's not just that they own the copyright on it, but that they have contracts and agreements with contributors to that film or television program that they have to honor and be careful about any future payments that need to be made to the contributors. Sometimes some contributors put a restriction on what can be done with their performance later. That has to be renegotiated if you want to make it accessible or useful in your archive. So it's not that easy, and it requires sort of sensitivity and time. And sometimes we don't always have that time. You know, if a family are desperate to clear the house, as John said earlier, because, you know, they've got costs that need to be matched. If it takes time to find the right archive to take the content and get them to agree to it, that again is another nasty dilemma for Film is Fabulous that John and Justin in particular have to address in discussion, usually with a few others and some of our advisors and so on. But archiving's not easy. So I understand why people have collected the stuff in the first place. It's great fun.
And worth pointing out, I think, that you're not an archive yourselves. You're a middleman.
That's a very important point. Film is Fabulous is not holding content. What we're trying to do, as John has coined this wonderful phrase, triage. Find it, identify what it is, decide what can be done with it, do that, and then move on to the next batch, the next item, and so on. So no, we're not hoarding, not creating an archive, because that's a whole other load of work that needs to be done.
Sure. So let's go back to source. Tell us about how you go about dealing with film collectors and their estates.
As I'm the person that is predominantly responsible for liaison with the film collecting community, I think it's probably better that I address this. And I have to say predominantly deal with it, because one of the things that has been so important is that we've developed a network of contacts who have assisted. So probably at this moment in time, about 50% of the liaison with people in the film collecting community, and I should add more recently, former industry professionals, and of course their estates when those individuals that were the original collectors have passed away. About 50% of those discussions are initially with myself, and the other are made up with trusted parties that act with us and on our behalf to help effectively. So, of course, there are layers to all of this, because every single situation, every single collection, every single collector is different. And the layers involve the type of films that people collect, the makeup of the collection, even whereabouts they are in the country and how we can get to them, actually remove their films and play a role. But fundamentally, the thing that has been the main driver has been the vulnerability of the film. So, of course, there are some very large collections that we are aware of that have important, dare I say, missing and rare items. But because they're safe and secure, and because we've had limited resources to take them in and to do all the things to catalogue them, we've left them in situ. Whereas those collections that perhaps might be smaller and we don't really understand what the content fully is, but they need to be moved from the property in 2 weeks, otherwise they're going into the skip, have taken priority. Now, going back to gauges, because I'm not sure how your followers and fans, Tim, will understand, there are a lot of different film gauges, a lot of different film types, and of course a lot of different genres that affect collections. So to give you an idea, and this is just a brief snapshot. We've dealt with people that own silent movies from the early 20th century that are on 35mm nitrate film. And if you look up any information to do with nitrate film, you'll see that it's volatile, combustible. And of course, we need to put everything in place to be able to move that to store it, which requires licenses, special transportation, etc., and, should I say, insurance. So we've been restricted as to what we could do with those items. There are other older formats, 9.5, 17.5, 28mm, the Pathé scope, silent and sound, which of course is a very niche area. There are 8mm home movies people have made to do with their day trip to the porcelain factory. And in the main, with 8mm, we've been liaising with the regional archives because, of course, there's a regional and historical importance. And then we get on to Super 8 and 8mm cut downs, which make up a lot of the introduction and base collection. So you'll get movies like Jaws and Star Wars and other things available on Super 8, which was an important part of the collection community. We don't tend to catalogue those in the same way because they are more commercially available. And finally, you get to the items like 16mm film recordings, tele-recordings, feature films, and 35mm, predominantly feature films. And as you said, most collectors, are interested in the cinematic experience of watching a feature film. Whether it's a James Bond or a Jimmy Cagney or whatever, that is what they're predominantly interested in. And television is a little bit of a curio. After features, you'll tend to find that people have enthusiasms for what we call film shorts, documentaries. So BP, Travelog are on 1,200 feet reels that someone can enjoy, made in the 60s about mining for gold in Zimbabwe or whatever. So there's all sorts of different things that people have enthusiasms for. So again, to give you an idea, a massive spectrum and of course layers to the individual collectors and collections. Now, through the pilot scheme, we identified several things. One was that the vast majority of people that want to take advantage of our service are those people with an immediate requirement, i.e., the collector, the former industry professional has passed away. They've got a time-limited window where they need to move the films out of the property, or they are going to dispose of those films. So there's been an immediate requirement, all hands to the pump, do what you can, save everything. And when I say save everything, when we've arrived on site, having agreed to remove the collection, what we've often found is that, and this is the same for all collectors, it's not just films. There's stacks of books and periodicals, magazines, memorabilia, equipment, projectors, all sorts of things, you name it, we've taken it away. And then what we do is we work with trusted and reliable third parties like Dr. Steve Arnold at the Radio Circle, who help us catalogue, for example, open reel cassettes and other things, so that we can then decide what the best course of action for those items are. We retain the film, and initially what we do is we place the film into an off-campus storage facility where we create a list of the items in that collection. Now, that's more challenging than we would like it to be because, as the pilot scheme identified, 18% of the films in the cans are not what's written on the label. And indeed, you'll find many cans with many labels and you still end up with a completely different film inside. So you really come back to that labor-intensive process of making a list, then identifying what's on the can, bringing groups of films into a controlled environment within special collections at Montfort University, where we predominantly examine the films by hand using a winder and a light box. When we have people like Paul Vinicius is available to help us. We'll get Paul with some items to go on to the 16mm or 35mm Steambex so that he can make a more detailed examination, although there are issues with doing that because, of course, that increases the likelihood of damage. So it is a very slow and labor-intensive purpose. At the end of the cataloguing, we have a complete detailed list of what comprises the film collection. We can then liaise with the estate, with the owner, to decide the best course, whether we scan items or whether we then liaise with a third party like the BBC Archive who will scan the item for us, therefore saving our cost. And of course, whether the scan is all that's deposited with an archive or whether the individual family are willing to donate the original print, which is preferable in many instances, or whether we have to find funds ourselves to purchase those prints so that we can secure them. Then you're left with the vast majority of the collection. And one of the key things is this: we are not treasure hunting. We've made it absolutely clear to the film collecting community that we are dealing with the entire collection and that we will do everything to recirculate the film collections that we catalogue within the community so that other people can enjoy those films. And that has worked extremely well. If the people in the film collecting community and all their estates thought we were just going to show up, go through 1,000 films, pick out the 12 best that suited our purpose, they wouldn't let us have access to those items. And that is an ongoing thing that will remain at the heart of Film is Fabulous. We have to deal with collections. We have to show respect to the people within the community. And of course, we have to look at those individuals that had saved these films, that had built up these collections over a life of enthusiasm, and show them respect. And I think that will remain at the heart of everything we do.
There's a real human element to the story, isn't there, John? Because you're dealing with people who are vulnerable and living in distressed circumstances sometimes, and you're also dealing with grieving families.
Look, I don't want to sound melodramatic, but yeah, it's a bittersweet. It really is a bittersweet situation for me and for many of my colleagues in the film collecting community, because you're dealing with people we've known for 30, 40, and some of the people longer than that are living the latter part of their life in distressed circumstances. And of course, the films represent that individual to us as fellow collectors, and particularly to their families, their loved ones. When they're gone, the films represent them, so we have to be respectful. I know that there's interest in what do they have, what is this, when are we going to be able to see it? And again, I don't want to be melodramatic, but we are dealing with humans that have lost loved ones, and we have to show respect.
Of course.
Just to add, we're just definitely not cherry picking at all. That's nothing really to do with Film is Fabulous. It's about helping the collectors.
Sure, and saving celluloid. And it's worth reminding my audience that television returns are almost really a byproduct of the process. And so we're very fortunate to have the team also having our interests in mind. So how have you managed to involve collectors in the work?
Yeah, very much so, Tim. I mean, picking up on the point that John made, this enterprise of cooperation of the film collecting community, and it's not simply about the films themselves. Often it's the knowledge that collectors have about the legacy, about what's left, and we depend upon the knowledge of experienced experts within the collecting community to understand some of the collections that we recover, to understand some of the more obscure items that come in as part of collections, whether they be projectors or other kinds of equipment there are specialists within the film collecting community who have incredible living knowledge of those bygone artifacts of cinema projection, for example. So the knowledge and the cooperation of the film collecting community is essential. They also know one another and so often can help facilitate the safe recovery of film from other collectors and collectors' estates. And I think there's another point that I'd like to make. Although John's quite right in saying that sadly and necessarily, our priorities have had to be rescuing vulnerable collections, often from the estates of the deceased collector. At the same time, the film collecting community has a huge legacy of knowledge and human stories. Predominantly, this is within living memory, a post-World War II phenomenon. So we're thinking about a culture that goes back to the Second World War. And many of the collecting community, or those collectors we engaged with, as John has also mentioned, have had some professional connections with the film or television industry. Now, as a film historian myself, I understand the incredible value of the histories, the professional legacies, the stories of those surviving individuals who might have worked in the industry or might be personal enthusiasts and collectors of film, and the potential not only to lose film itself if we don't safeguard it, but actually to lose the knowledge of those individuals, which is unique, and their experiences. And so certainly as a byproduct and an adjunct to the central purpose of Film is Fabulous, and where the partnership again with film historians at Montfort University is very, very important to us, is in recovering what we can and preserving what we can of that knowledge and the human stories behind the collections. And so we are embarking on a series of oral history interviews moving forward with surviving collectors and former industry professionals in order to document that knowledge and collect those stories for posterity, which we'll also be archiving and making available. We've already had some fabulous contributions from collectors at the public events that we've staged over the past 2 years, where, collectors have really enlivened the whole event and the material we're screening through sharing their stories. And we're also very fortunate that Sue is absolutely instrumental in another long-standing initiative, which is the British Entertainment History Project, whose core purpose is actually working with and recording oral histories with former industry professionals in this country. And so we hope moving forward that some of the stories we're being able to collect may contribute to those other sympathetic initiatives that run in parallel as well. But, let me say this, it's not just about the collections, it's about the collectors too. And the human stories are very much important to what we see as the value of our enterprise.
And if I could just add to that, it was fantastic down in Hereford or maybe it's up in Hereford, depends where you are. But at the courtyard in Hereford, we had a wonderful panel of collectors, and it was such a pleasure talking to them and hearing their experiences and the kind of attitude they had to what they were doing and the whole social history that's there behind the kind of things they collect. It was fantastic. So I'm really pleased to be able to be part of Film is Fabulous and bring my knowledge and experience from the British Entertainment History Project, which used to be known as the Beck2 History Project, which is now well over 800 interviews with, as Justin calls them, film and television practitioners, talking about their experience knowledge, some of whom I bet had great collections at home, but we were all too late to ever, catch them and keep them, kind of thing. So I hope we can give some advice and help to Justin with the interviews with collectors, and maybe longer term be the long-term archive and the place to store these interviews. Obviously, initially, they're going to be accessible, I would presume, through Film is Fabulous website or whatever. But in terms of archive role, maybe the British Entertainment History Project can help out there and certainly help with some of the interviews and interviewing techniques. So it's a great collaborative thing that we'd never envisaged at the start of all this would happen. But it's a lot of good things keep coming out of Film is Fabulous. So, and this is just another one.
Well, I'm going to take the opportunity to plug the British Entertainment History Project, and I'll put the link in the notes for the podcast, because I happened to go on there one afternoon looking for anyone who was in I, Claudius, and about 3 hours later, I was getting to the back end of an interview with John Mills about something completely unrelated. It's a fantastic resource, and one that isn't very widely known about in my circles anyway. So I'll link to that. You can get lost.
That's great. Because again, like Film is Fabulous, we're a bunch of volunteers, and maybe like film collectors of a certain age and so on. So not quite as driven and enthusiastic as John and Justin are. Just for example, though, we've been doing a lot of work just recently trying to research our collection for anything on Stanley Kubrick, because there is a company, I think, planning a documentary on him. And we've got loads of people talking about him. I have to say, I did some research a while ago, a lot of interviews with people who worked on Doctor Who as well, because they worked on all sorts of things, not just Doctor Who. And so they're there in the BHP collection. They're great.
So you recently posted about handling 350 reels of nitrate films and sending those over to the Library of Congress. What can you tell us about that?
Well, that's just it's a fascinating story. In fact, all of these stories to do with silent movies and nitrate are, in my view, fascinating, and probably, with the greatest respect to the other things that we found, missing television, etc., are the most important recoveries that we've made to date. I mean, in 2013, the Library of Congress in the US published a detailed report where they stated that 70% of all silent movies are missing. Just think about that. So 350 reels. This was a collector in the UK that had amassed a substantive collection. He'd been able to identify about 150 of those. So, of course, 200 or just over were not identified. And one of the reasons that they're going to go back to the US is they will make sure that they're preserved where they need to have restoration restored. And indeed, where they'll hold a couple of very specific events with other experts to try and identify what the items are. We had one very, very interesting situation that arose quite recently. A gentleman contacted us through the website. I happen to have some films which I found in an outhouse at the property he was clearing for a family member. And lo and behold, there were 4 reels of nitrate film, one of which was the very first appearance of Oliver Babe Hardy in a silent movie. Now, only one copy of that film exists, which was found under an ice rink in Canada in 1978. The existing copy is in very poor condition. The one we have is actually in remarkable condition. And so it is also going to be winging its way back to the Library of Congress for restoration and for presentation at a very important event. And then I hope online or on DVD. So all of these things are fascinating. When you dive into the history of that particular individual, and we've been doing some research, the family are fascinated now, of course, as well. It appears he was the head projectionist at the Palace Cinema in Sheffield for many years, and that's probably where the films came from, because it looks like they've been sat in the brick outhouse for, wait for it, almost 60 years. So one never really knows what you're going to find, what is going to come up on a day-to-day basis. That's part of the thrill, but also part of the headache. Headaches we have on a regular basis, and we'll continue to deal with them as best we can.
You mentioned an ice rink in Canada. Is that the famous ice rink in Canada? Is that the Yukon Frozen Time find? Well, there's a fascinating film about that story, and if you want to hear about want to learn about the vulnerability of nitrate film, or indeed the robustness of nitrate film, seek out that film. It's called Frozen Time, documentary film, and it talks about the bicycling of films around the network and what happens to them when they reach the end of the line. And I'm sure that'll be of interest to my listeners. So one of the key objectives, which I've seen you post about and talk about often, is having material seen. You know, it's often said, well, what's the point in finding this stuff or handing over this stuff if it's going to fester in an archive somewhere and never see the light of day? So are there challenges with this? Are there opportunities with this?
There certainly are, Tim, both challenges and opportunities. And as Sue, as a professional archivist, knows, there is always a tension around film archiving between preservation and access, because the best way of keeping a film and preserving it is to put it in optimum conditions and to leave it there and to not show it at all. But that is not the purpose of Film is Fabulous. The educational part of our objectives, which we've articulated very clearly, is that we want to share and contribute to film culture and to the incredible enthusiasm that exists for vintage film and television. And that is a vibrant culture in which many, many thousands of people share. And we want very much to share with the public as widely as possible the range of items that we uncover. And if these are particularly rare or missing items, then obviously there is an additional attraction and interest in those items. But the important thing to remember is that Film is Fabulous, like any other film archive, has no jurisdiction over the rights to any of the material that we recover. And that's why our first point of contact when we are cataloguing material that we've taken in is to reach out to the rights holders in the case of material that is rare, unusual, perhaps missing, and to consult them. To consult them, first of all, about the possibilities of restoration and returning copies to their archives, then about the process of cleaning, repairing, and scanning to create viewing copies that are viable and sustainable, and then to work very closely and sensitively with them to see if we can organize arrangements whereby we, for a limited period, would be able to screen publicly those items that we have recovered. And we've had a very sympathetic response from the BBC archives in particular, but other archives as well, and our friends at the British Film Institute too, in helping us to arrange temporary limited licenses for the public screening of some of the material that we've discovered. Now, that's been very important, and we've already mentioned some of our events that we've staged over the past couple of years. Phoenix Cinema in Leicester, down in Hereford, as Sue mentioned. And we've also been able to contribute items to other organised events. For example, we found a missing episode of the very popular and long-running children's television show Play School, which we were able to show at a dedicated event celebrating 60 years of Play School at the Riverside in Hammersmith last year. And it was an absolutely delightful event where we were able to show the episode that we'd recovered in front of an audience, which included the presenter featured in that particular episode, who's now 90s. And it was a really, really special moment. Similarly, our friends at the British Film Institute run a long-standing Missing Believed White strand at BFI South Bank. And only a couple of weeks ago, we contributed some items to a retrospective on the independent television company Associated Rediffusion from the 1950s and 60s, where we were able to show a very early ITV Playhouse production and other items as well that we'd recovered. So it is very important that we are able to disseminate the finds that we recover and contribute to such events, because this is all about an awareness of and a celebration of vintage film and television for the many, many people who have an interest and a passion in this area. And obviously an important way also in which we can articulate the purpose of our work.
Could I just add to that, Justin, that we'll always be seeking other opportunities with other organizations to get more exposure to the items we're finding, because we know how frustrated people are when they hear about what's been found and then they haven't got a chance to see it. So it's an important area for us to address.
And that's a very important point. And actually, I should add that we are talking to a range of specialist broadcasters and have contributed, indeed, items of our finds to, for example, Talking Pictures TV, who screened some of the material that we've recovered, and Rewind Television and others as well. So broadcast outlets are another very important platform for showing the material we've recovered and, of course, for reaching those audiences for vintage film and television.
That's a fantastic recap about everything that Film is Fabulous about and what's gone on over recent years. Thank you so much. But one of the reasons we're here, and the main reason we're here, is because there was an announcement made by the Film is Fabulous team in the last week, and that is that Film is Fabulous have been awarded Charitable Trust status. So why don't you tell us what that means for Film is Fabulous?
Well, it's just a fantastic breakthrough for us. It's something we've been waiting for a while, and it was only late last week that we had confirmed in writing and verbally that we have Charitable Trust status. We're just now waiting for the announcement to be put onto their website so that we have the key identification number. But all that is in progress at the moment. So this is a big breakthrough for us, which enables us to have a totally different approach to fundraising in particular. But it also, at a top level, gives us much more kind of credibility that we have this status. But to go with that, we have to put in place the right kind of governance and management of that. So to add to the board of 3 trustees that we have at the moment, we're inviting 3 more who we're so pleased have agreed to join us, because it's very important for us to broaden the range of skills and experience that we've got. So I'm pleased to say that Lorraine Porter, an academic, is joining us, who has worked with, in fact, the BEHP on many occasions, analysing our interviews in terms of women's careers and things like that. Simon Nichols, who was our host down at the Courtyard in Hereford, has also agreed to join. He knows so much about projection and projectors and a lot more, but he is a wonderful addition. And also Alicia Henfrey has agreed to join us as well. So she'll have many more skills in terms of funding, marketing, things like that we need to bring to the team to try and kind of significantly move forward, because this charitable trust status is a big part of that. The other important thing is it will enable us to fundraise in quite a different way when we go to various organizations. They say, no, we have this status and the governance that goes behind it. Hopefully we'll be much more successful in attracting funding, and also for people who make donations to us, which is fantastic. We can be more flexible now in suggesting or allowing that they fund particular activities, which would be much more difficult to do without the proper charitable status. So it's really important announcement for us. Just to say about the trustees, we don't want to flood the board kind of thing. So we do look to a team of advisors as well as a way of complementing the information we might need or the experience we might need to draw on. So we're putting in place a really good structure and governance to take the project forward.
Fantastic. And I think it's worth remembering as well that it's all being done on a voluntary basis in terms of governance and advisors and so on. But there are costs that Film is Fabulous are encountering. So could you give us an example of some of the costs you're running into?
Well, I mean, everything we do effectively creates a cost. To go and inspect someone's collection on site creates costs. I mean, not just in terms of petrol and this, but time. To actually go with the porterage team or to hire a long wheelbase Mercedes van is a cost. To do all the things to bring the items into a storage unit is a cost. I mean, it just goes on and on. Scanning, professional scanning, to do things at a very professional level where items are in suboptimal condition. Of course, we had the example which we mentioned on a previous podcast where we actually reached out to film and television enthusiasts to raise money through a crowdfunding or GoFundMe platform, where we were able to do preservation and restoration work on a television episode from the late 1950s. We were supported tremendously there, and we're able not only to get that item on the screen at an event, but to provide that item in its digital form to the rights holder, and it can be broadcast widely, I will say, on Talking Pictures to an eager audience, part of the Danziger series. So all of these things take time, money, and create costs. Sue has done a fantastic job of outlining some of the things to do with the charity. I just want to add a couple of things, if I can. Structure and mandate is very, very important, because we've been doing everything to this point in time as volunteers, working with De Montfort University. So we've been able to lean on De Montfort University for help with insurance coverage, but we don't own the films that we collect from collectors, and we store and we place and catalogue. So, of course, we have to have all the requisite insurances in place. Mine's actually up at the end of October. So, I mean, these are real costs, hundreds and hundreds of pounds. And that's one of the reasons why the team has been relatively small, because if we were to bring in volunteers to handle film, help us to collect things, we'd have to insure everyone. We just simply haven't had the money and the ability to do that. So everything has a knock-on effect. How many people are involved have to be reflected by the coverage, insurance, the costs, etc., etc. And now that we've got charitable trust status and are a registered charity, we can raise unrestricted and restricted funds, which allow us to do and will allow us to do a whole lot more.
Fantastic. So how is fundraising going? Is there anything specific that raised funds will be spent on?
For example, since the announcement about charitable trust status, which is less than a week ago almost, we've had over 400 donations made. Also, people are actually pledging regular payments. And all of this is so helpful. It's absolutely wonderful that people want to feel committed and involved in what we're doing. There are more things to do than just donate money, but we have to say we appreciate that so much. And any way we can make it possible to encourage people to do that with attendance at particular events and things like that, we will. But again, John and Justin have been much more closely involved with this. So perhaps hand over to you.
Yes, thank you, Sue. There's another aspect to our charitable trust status and the important ability to raise funds that is worth mentioning. John's already talked about, if you like, our bread and butter operation and the costs involved and the capacity which additional funding will give us to expand our operation, to involve more people in assisting us and to deal with more collections, because the reality, the truth of the situation is we have a long, long list of collections we're waiting to deal with. And we're doing that on a case-by-case priority basis. But our ability to raise funds will mean that we'll be able to enlarge our operation to an extent which will enable us to deal with more films more quickly, which is very, very important. But there's another aspect to this, important and valuable though private personal donations and regular commitments are to the ongoing work of Film is Fabulous. And we're hugely grateful for that fantastic response, as Sue mentioned, that happened just in the first week of our charitable trust status. But moving ahead, charitable trust status also gives us another opportunity, and that is to apply for larger scale funding through charities, through other bona fide outlets, such as, for example, the Heritage Lottery Fund, in order to be able to embark on dedicated projects around particular collections, and indeed to extend some of the other things that we want to be able to do, as I mentioned earlier, such as the oral history project side of things. So our ability not only to fundraise from the kindness and generosity of individuals, but also through applications to other sources of funding is going to be really tremendously important to move us on to the next phase of our operation.
Yes, and may I just interject by putting some actual facts and figures in front of everyone? Because, of course, what charitable trust status also allows us to do is to raise funds from particular pots to acquire collections. And again, this is fundamental. We're not cherry picking by going in and taking 12 items out of a collection of 1,000. We are dealing with collections, and that is what's allowing us to have access to these films. So it may well be that we have to raise sufficient funds to purchase a collection at a fair and valued market price. So how do we come up with a fair and valued market price for a collection, particularly a large collection? 6,000 films, for example, in a particular collection. That particular collector's enthusiasm was predominantly transport. So let's take an example. You might have a BP transport film or British transport film, 900 feet on a 1,200 foot reel, that if it were placed on eBay would sell for between 20 and 25 pounds. Single item, extrapolate that. You're talking a collection that would have a value of between 120,000 and 150,000 pounds.
Gosh.
It may well be at auction, because the films are placed into lots, that the estate wouldn't achieve that amount, but that is what the estate would value the collection at. So we are absolutely delighted to have the monies that have been donated thus far. But you can see, if we're going to go down the route of acquiring collections to safeguard rare and missing items, which there could be half a dozen or a dozen in a collection of 1,000 or 10,000 films, we need sufficient money to be able to do so.
But I think also, John, am I right to stress that you use the phrase acquire collections, but we don't want to become an archive at all. It would be acquiring in order to process the collection rather than store it for ourselves in any way at all.
Oh, absolutely, because one of the bigger parts associated with archiving is the footprint that film creates. I mean, to have the space, to store the space, the whole process of taking films in, being able to manage them, list them, catalogue them, and then put them out using that triage term that we've coined as a phrase, is so important. Now, we, of course, once we own the films, can decide how we go about selling them. Or disposing of them. We can give items to bona fide official archives. We could sell things by tender, which is what we've done with certain items. We can sell things via auction. We can sell things directly from our website to collectors. And the beautiful thing about going down the route that we have with tender and direct sales is we increase the database of contacts that we have, worldwide collectors network. And therefore, not only does Film is Fabulous have an impression on the UK's film collecting community, but we can have a positive impact on film collectors worldwide. And you well know, Sue, we've had many people come forward from other countries at events. We go to Blackpool, Sue, we'll meet collectors from all over Europe and many parts of the world, and they're interested in buying films that we've actually handled. So that is a process that leads from one thing on to the next and actually has a extremely positive impact.
Yeah, definitely. We have made links now with a newly founded American organization that I think has grown out of the organization called EMEA, that is setting out to look for missing American feature films. And I think they're focused on films, not television. But it's early days with that relationship.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm just sat here sort of worrying about the costs you're encountering because you've had some fantastic support in the first week. But even I remember, John, that when you were restoring the episode of The Vise, the Danziger brothers, I mean, that was thousands of pounds, wasn't it, to restore one episode of television? And you're talking about required funding of up to 6 figures to acquire a large collection. It's staggering.
It is. And that's why we need to work in a collaborative way with the official archives. I mean, I have to say that we've been so fortunate with the way we've been able to forge a relationship with the BBC archive and latterly with the BFI. The two of them have taken the items that we've recovered, have incurred all the costs of scanning and grading, and that's been that's made a tremendous impact to help us financially. Plus, we've also been able to lean on some of the people within our sphere. One of our advisors, I have to mention, is Paul Venesis, who has done tremendous work in making sure that certain items that we want to screen at our own events and which we want to be able to use as part of the promotional process is technically up to scratch. So, Paul's input has been invaluable, and we will do everything we can to collaborate with these people to make things more widely available. But cost has an impact on what we're able to do.
Can I just add a point there? Because I think it's important for listeners to clarify what our fundraising ability enables us to do, and that our core principles of operation are not fundamentally changed by this ability to or necessity to raise funds. Predominantly thus far, the collections we have handled have been taken in on a basis of either donation or short-term loan in order to process those collections and recover, as we've mentioned, any rare or missing items, which then in consultation with the copyright holders, we may return to official archives. And thereafter, we have often sold either at film collecting conventions or via specialist auction houses. The bulk of large collections, the proceeds of which have then been returned to the estate and the owner of those items from whence they have come. John mentioned an important thing there, our additional ability to buy collections direct. And I wouldn't want us to misrepresent the sense of what our purpose is. We are not abandoning that earlier formula in favor of direct acquisition per se, but additional funds give us the opportunity, where necessary or appropriate, for us to buy a collection directly. But we will continue to rely upon the goodwill and the wishes, indeed, of families and estates of collectors to donate or to take in collections on a loan agreement basis. So I think it's important, John, that we clarify that that's not a sort of step change in the way we're going to do things.
No, it's something that has to reflect the individual circumstances surrounding a collection, an owner, and of course their wishes, because everything to this point has been done with consent, and that will continue to be the case. We work with people, we respect their wishes, we do not coerce them, we do not badger elderly collectors into doing things they do not want to do. And that leads me very neatly onto a couple of things that I'd like to introduce into this conversation, to do with things that we've encountered and circumstances that have an impact on how people perceive what we're doing. So perhaps now is a good time to mention those things. Let me talk about some of the situations that we've encountered with collectors, with former industry professionals, and with their estates. As I said right at the beginning, one of the driving factors for this was items were being lost, and people weren't in control of the situation, because the collectors and the people that had passed away had no lists, had no wills, gave no instructions to what they want to happen. So whilst we've been cataloguing films, and whilst we've been doing the things that have ended up with returns going back to copyright holders, official archives, etc., we've also spent a similar amount of time liaising with people that, quite frankly, and for whatever reason, do not want Film is Fabulous to actually catalogue the collection. What they want is someone to perhaps turn up at the property, give them some advice, tell them about the ways that we do things, and of course, note and observe some of the items that they may or may not be aware of in terms of their rarity, etc., etc. So we've been building up, and haven't made this known to the world, that database as well, and of course, details of some rare and missing items that we've quite frankly recommended the individuals to return to the rights holder. But if you're an elderly collector in their 80s, you may not know how. One, you can't even lift the films in some instances. You can't create lists. You have to rely on family members. And two, you're not in a position where you are able to contact particular people. So you need a conduit. You need someone like Film is Fabulous to do that work on your behalf. So we are aware of a number of things that I have permission to mention, because they've come up for various reasons in conversations. So, for example, we're aware of a couple of early episodes of The Avengers, one of which is complete. I've seen it. That particular person is a former industry person that was actually involved in the production and broadcast of the episodes. So it has a strong sentimental value. The fact that they're not well and they need help doing things and they're not quite sure if they want to do it right now means that we will work with them. We will do everything we can to help and assist to get that item back to the copyright holder. And it may not be a Film is Fabulous find, but these are things that are going on in the background. Another who we've given advice to, or when I say we, a couple of my colleagues have given advice to, has one of only 6 episodes from BBC Two's late night horror series, made in the late 90s. that's not in the best of condition, so it needs some work to be done. And I'm hoping that that will go back to the BBC very soon. And indeed, I've spoken to another collector that has quite an interesting collection that includes 4 episodes of Simon D's D Time. And as Sue will know, the BBC actually only has 1 episode in the archive.
Yeah, there's hardly anything. Yeah.
We've recommended to that individual that it goes back. We've explained how we would do it, and I'm very hopeful that soon those items will be, if not all of them, some of them will be reposited. And trust and the way we go about doing things is so important because, as Justin mentioned, these collectors, they know one another. They are, in the main, very cautious. They don't want to say how they acquired certain things. And we respect and work with them about their collections and their wishes and hopes.
Yeah, well, that's very exciting, John, and also interesting. Yeah, just on that, I mean, a revelation for me when we talked on our previous podcast a few years ago is none of this film has been, apart from some 8mm commercially available titles, none of these films have been purchased legitimately. You know, there's plenty that's been rescued out of cinemas that are being demolished, or, you know, things which are no longer of interest, but none of this is legitimately obtained items, is it? So and with what happened to Bob Monkhouse and the confiscation and loss of his collection, or large parts of his collection, I think it's important that people understand that people are going to be concerned, despite amnesties that they're not aware of and so on and so forth. They're going to be concerned about the knock on the door, aren't they, John?
Of course. If you're in your late 80s or 90s and for whatever reason have ended up with some items that you salvaged on the skip outside BBC Enterprises or the famous BBC Wood Lane skip or whatever, and you were somehow involved in production or worked at the BBC, you would be reluctant to come forward. And that has been the case. People are concerned. And we're doing everything we can behind the curtain. So it's discreet, it's done with empathy and integrity to reassure people. And we hope that in time, we will be able to be part of the return. Whether it's announced as a Film is Fabulous return or whatever, it doesn't really matter. As long as the items and importantly, the collection is preserved, that's one of our main priorities.
Since I kind of started a lot of this many, many years ago, I am so pleased that the BBC now is taking such a positive attitude and no recrimination anywhere. No, how did you get this? None of those questions are being asked at all. Everybody is just so pleased that someone has saved this material and we can get it back into an archive and hopefully in future get it exposed and shown to audiences through broadcasting.
Well, Sue, not to embarrass you, and I know I said this at an event in May, but for those listening, if you're not aware of Sue Malden's role in archive television when Sue was at the BBC, Sue effectively changed the archiving policy at the BBC and stopped TV from being junked. So Sue is an absolute hero and legend of archive TV, and vintage telly fans should fall at your feet, Sue.
Thank you so much. Yeah. There's no need to fall. No.
All right. So the big news is that Film is Fabulous have achieved charity status, but I'm sure the reason a lot of people are listening is because there were some comments made on the Facebook page concerning missing episodes of Doctor Who. What can you tell us about Doctor Who?
Well, I'll be the person that steps up to talk about this because, as I said earlier, I'm the one that is predominantly involved in the discussions with the individual collectors, the former industry professionals, and in the main with their estates or their representatives. So this is the situation as I can outline it, but I do want to preface this by saying a couple of things to your audience. So this really came about because there was a reply posted to a comment on our Facebook page. It wasn't an announcement of anything. It was a reply to a comment. And as we've noted many times, if you mention Doctor Who, things tend to escalate very quickly into a storm of speculation. And we, quite frankly, wouldn't be sitting here today going through things to do with Doctor Who. We would probably have put out a more neutral Film is Fabulous podcast talking about the charity, had a number of things not arisen where we feel we have to make a comment, not only to calm the waters and to create a more measured environment in which we're working, but to keep everyone up to date, because we totally understand all of the excitement, all of the enthusiasm, and the interest. So I'm going to say this with regards to collectors, former industry professionals, and Doctor Who episodes. And this is a continuation of what Sue basically said in May at Recovered. We are aware of several collectors, plural, with several episodes of Doctor Who that are missing from the archive, plural, that are in private collections and with former industry professionals. We are aware of those, and we are actively discussing their whole collections. We're not going to just take the Doctor Who or the other rare bits they have. We're talking about the whole collections coming in, being catalogued, and being in and managed in the way that we manage everything. So I hope that is a positive that your listeners take out of this. But the comment that was made on Facebook related specifically to one item, one unique set of circumstances with a film collector. And I'm going to give you some information about that. Of course, we have a duty of care which we cannot exceed. And I hope people will respect that. But I'm going to be as open and as honest as I can right now. Since 2023, I and a couple of other key members of the Film is Fabulous team have been aware of a large collection of films, thousands of films, that have become vulnerable. That collection contains some very important material, including a missing episode of Doctor Who. Now, it is a large collection, and there is a possibility that there are other episodes of Doctor Who in that collection, but at this moment in time, we know of one. As outlined earlier, what we're doing is we're dealing with entire collections, and so we're not simply going to remove a single print or the rare missing items. It would be illegal and immoral, and that's not the way that Film is Fabulous operates. Now, sadly, the collector who owns that collection has been in very poor health since COVID. They've been in and out of hospital, in and out of respite care, and a couple of weeks ago, they were admitted to a hospital for end-of-life care. And remember what we said.
Yeah.
We're doing things with respect, and we're doing things legally and morally. Because if we make mistakes now, if we start doing things because there's an expedient requirement to do things in a wrong way, we will corrupt our opportunities to deal with people in the film collecting community overnight, and everything will come to an end. Now, in the background, we've been desperate to try and find a solution. We've been liaising with the local healthcare trust that have been the deputies, the administrators, effectively, for that gentleman's estate, which includes the films. And we couldn't really do anything until we became a registered charity, which we didn't get although we had applied for registered charitable status on the 29th of January, we didn't actually get that confirmation until last Friday. So, of course, we acted immediately. We contacted the Healthcare Trust through our solicitor. Everything was progressing on a legal basis. And after a slight delay, we'd had confirmation from the Healthcare Trust and their legal team that we could actually go into the property with their oversight, remove all of the films, bring them back to our secure facility, catalogue them, and once we had a catalogue, then make an offer for the entire collection to acquire and to safeguard the rare and missing items. And indeed, we're recording this on Friday, the 10th of October, and that was the day we were due to go in and collect those items. We've got a lot of things set up, indeed, a whole team of people to help assist. But very sadly, the collector passed away earlier this week. And with the collector's demise, the jurisdiction of the Healthcare Trust ends. The items revert to the estate, and on examination of the person's will, both executors of the estate are already dead. Therefore, the will is invalid. It's called intestate. We will make an application to the court to do exactly what we had agreed to do with the Healthcare Trust. Now, our solicitor, who's acting obviously on our behalf, thinks we've got an absolutely good chance of doing that very quickly because we're not involved in the sale of the property and other aspects of the estate. The Healthcare Trust were delighted that we'd actually go in and look after all of the films because, of course, that is a function that they didn't really want to do. So, where are we? We didn't make an announcement about that item. It was a comment and everything's blown up. And of course, we've had to respond. And we are doing everything legally with propriety to make sure we secure that collection and can return that missing episode of Doctor Who and other items to the rights holder. Now, I do want to make a comment which could be construed as a rebuke to Doctor Who fandom and general people that are interested in cinema and television and so forth, because some of the things have gone beyond the threshold. Now, I'm not going to labor the point because we skew positive. We're trying to do things in a positive way. As I said, we understand the excitement and the enthusiasm, but we do not want people turning up at Montfort University uninvited, trying to get access to special collections so that they can look at the films.
Yeah.
I've had it once, we don't want it again. And we will not tolerate, under any circumstances, abuse or threats of physical violence against our person and the team, because we will not share details of the collector and the films with certain individuals. That has resulted and will result in police involvement. Now, I'm sorry to say those things, but we've had such a tremendous response, enjoyed all of the positives from 99.99% of people who follow fandom and Doctor Who, but there are a small number of people that do not understand where the line is. And I'm afraid I think some of the frenzy that's built up with this comment encourages that. So can I just ask people to give us the space to conclude the things that we're doing? You will be very, very happy with the announcements when they come, but we just need the space to be able to do that now.
That's terrible to hear. And yeah, I'm sorry you're encountering that. Come on, guys, sort this out. Give Film is Fabulous some room to do this. I think what I've seen, John, is one, people need to remember you don't need to do any of this. It's an initiative about celluloid, and television is a byproduct, and it's brilliant. It's brilliant for us. And secondly, I know you're on the socials, and I know there is a very small team manning the socials, and you're extremely interactive. and people are watching what you're doing in live time, as it were. It's a live exercise, and you and others are very conversational and want people to have a understanding of what's going on. And yeah, it's sad to hear you're getting that sort of outrageous negative response. But at the same time, it's a large community that I'm involved with. I hope you recognize that the vast majority of the response has been mature and celebratory and supportive. And indeed, I'm sure that the community, having heard this, will be wanting to support you in any way they possibly can.
Well, that's what we're hoping for. We want to be able to celebrate the things we're doing. It's not about us. It's about the film collectors and their legacies. We want to make sure that everyone can enjoy that. We're working hard. Crikey, I didn't think I'd be doing quite so many hours. I'm sure Justin didn't expect to be driving vans and lifting things. And Sue, God bless her, she's offered to come back from retirement in Greece and start helping us cataloguing films. We're all mucking in, all unpaid, all doing this because of the love. And I don't want to be getting abusive messages. Again, we'll skew positive. Let's put that behind us now, and let's look at the sunlit uplands that we can all look forward to.
All right. Well, thank you so much, John, for dealing with that clarification in great detail, more detail than I think anyone could reasonably hope to have heard. And as I say, let's give Film is Fabulous the room to do things properly, and hopefully in the future we'll have some positive news to celebrate. Not just for Doctor Who, but there's lots of television out there, and hopefully there'll be some other titles that people can celebrate. All right, so let's conclude. So let me ask each of you to give your thoughts about the progress of Film is Fabulous and the future of Film is Fabulous as a charity.
Well, I'd like to start first by saying, on behalf of De Montfort University, that we are absolutely delighted with our ongoing partnership with Film is Fabulous. We congratulate Film is Fabulous on achieving its Charitable Trust status and are committed to continuing to work to support Film is Fabulous moving forward into the next phase. And as a film historian, an historian of television culture as well, I'm especially excited about the opportunities for one of the next phases of our development, which is going to be the oral history aspect with surviving collectors and former industry professionals that we hope to embark upon in the year ahead. And there'll be lots more about those interviews on our website in due course. But that's, for me, a really exciting part of documenting the whole culture of post-war film collecting in Britain moving forward, which we're in a good position to play a leading role in.
I think we should leave the last word to John. So can I just say, this is just the beginning. We've achieved a hell of a lot so far, but we know there's far, far more to be done. There's far more people who are going to need help with their collections and families having to address these issues. There's still stuff that's missing, dare I say, 97 Doctor Who's. And I'm really looking forward. I loved cataloguing at work. I'm really looking forward to leave the Greek sun and see and come back and catalogue something. So exciting times ahead.
Well, I'm going to leave the last word to someone that we've helped. And this is quite emotional for me, I have to say, because as I said at the beginning, a lot of these people are people that I have known for 30 or 40 years that have passed away. And of course, their legacy is their film. We helped one family, the Moore family, to catalogue and then dispose of their David's films, their late father's films. And Jenny and Anne, the two daughters, spoke to me in a lovely way, saying how they'd learned so much about their dad's enthusiasm for vintage television, because that's really what he had in his collection. And she wrote, "From myself and the family, John, we can't thank you enough for everything you've done." And that makes it all worthwhile. Thanks.
There we have it. And I certainly didn't go into that conversation expecting quite so much candour about a subject we're all very passionate about. For my part, I would just ask people to consider whether they need to be emailing Film is Fabulous to ask for an update on Doctor Who, and whether every Facebook comment needs to be greeted with dozens of comments asking for an update about Doctor Who. We are getting live updates as and when we can get them, and as you've heard, I think it's really important that they're given the space to operate. But the fact that there are several missing episodes, several by definition being more than a few and less than many, is really exciting and positive, because regardless of where they are, a few weeks ago they didn't exist as far as we knew, and them existing is 99.9% of the battle. So we can certainly be optimistic, but we also need to be supportive and kind as well. And that's it. So thank you so much once again to Sue, Justin and John, and of course to Mark Gatiss for getting us off to such a splendid start. No Patreon message this time, but thanks so much to our executive producers, Rich Tipple and Bedwyr Gullidge, and everyone whose support allows this podcast to happen. And we'll be back next time with our look at the Highlanders, which contains new information that you didn't know before. So, see you then.